Poor nurse spent her last $5 to buy a drink, unaware her blind date was the cafe's CEO. Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, her tired eyes drifting to the cracked ceiling of her tiny apartment. The walls were paper-thin. She could hear the muffled sounds of her neighbor's TV and a baby crying somewhere down the hall. It was 5:30 a.m., and the alarm clock had rung 3 times already, but she had barely closed her eyes. Night shifts at the hospital left her exhausted, drained not just physically but emotionally. Being a nurse meant giving pieces of herself every day to strangers, comforting them when they were in pain, holding their hands when their families couldn't be there, and fighting silently through her own struggles. Her paycheck barely covered rent, groceries, and the student loans that haunted her. For the past week, she had been counting coins in a small glass jar on her kitchen counter. When she finally emptied it the night before, she realized she had only $5 left until payday. Just 5. Enough for a cheap meal or maybe a small treat, if she dared to give herself one. Amelia sighed, brushed back her loose brown hair, and pulled on her scrubs. She looked at her reflection in the small cracked mirror by the door. Her eyes, tired, yet kind, stared back at her. She whispered softly, as she often did before leaving, "Just keep going. One day at a time." At the hospital, the day was long and unforgiving. An elderly patient cried out in pain, a young man was rushed in after an accident, and a mother begged Amelia to save her child. Nurses weren't just healers, they were listeners, shoulders to cry on, invisible heroes who never stopped moving. By the time Amelia left, the sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and gold. She looked down at her purse. The $5 bill was tucked neatly inside. She thought about using it to buy a small meal from the cafeteria, but her stomach tightened with a different kind of hunger, not for food, but for something normal, something human. She hadn't been on a date in years. Life had been all about work, bills, and survival. But a few weeks ago, her friend Clara had convinced her to try online dating. "You deserve happiness too, Amelia," Clara had said. "You give everything to others, let someone give to you for once." Hesitant but curious, Amelia had agreed. She matched with a man named Daniel, who seemed different from the rest. His messages weren't shallow compliments or empty words. He asked about her dreams, her favorite books, the songs she listened to after long shifts. He never pushed for pictures or details she wasn't ready to share. He just listened. And somehow, in those quiet exchanges, Amelia felt seen. Tonight, they were supposed to meet for the first time, at a cafe downtown. Amelia nearly canceled twice, feeling guilty for even thinking about spending money she didn't have. But Clara had insisted again, "Go. You need this." So, with her last $5, Amelia walked into the warm glow of the cafe. The smell of roasted coffee beans wrapped around her like a hug. The wooden chairs, the soft music, the clinking of mugs, it all felt like a different world, far away from the hospital's harsh lights and endless alarms. She stepped up to the counter, nervously smoothing her worn-out jacket. "Just a small coffee, please," she whispered, sliding the $5 bill forward. The barista smiled politely, handed her the change, and poured the drink. Amelia held the cup carefully, as though it was more precious than it really was. For her, it wasn't just coffee. It was courage, a symbol of daring to live, even if just for one evening. She scanned the cafe for her blind date. Daniel had said he would be wearing a navy blue jacket. Amelia spotted him near the corner, sitting alone with a thoughtful expression. Her heart thudded as she walked over. "Daniel?" she asked softly. The man looked up, and his face broke into a gentle smile. "Amelia. Hi. I'm glad you came." He stood to shake her hand, and for a moment she noticed his firm grip, his steady eyes, and a warmth that seemed genuine. She sat across from him, clutching her cup nervously. Their conversation began awkwardly, as most first meetings do. Amelia apologized for looking tired, explaining she had just come off a long shift. Daniel listened with interest, asking her about her work, her patience, and the challenges she faced. She was surprised he didn't seem bored or distracted. Most people tuned out when she talked about nursing. But Daniel leaned in, asking, "How do you keep going when it's so hard?" Amelia blinked, startled by the depth of his question. "I guess, because someone has to," she said after a pause. "Sometimes people don't have anyone else. If I can make even one person feel less alone, it's worth it. Even if no one ever notices." Daniel's eyes softened. "That's rare. Most people think about what they can get. You think about what you can give." The hours slipped by like minutes. They talked about books they loved, the songs that carried them through tough days, childhood memories, and silly stories. Amelia found herself laughing, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a tired nurse, not as someone drowning in bills, but simply as Amelia. What she didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just another man looking for companionship. He was the CEO of the very cafe they were sitting in. He had built it from scratch after inheriting nothing, once working long hours as a barista himself. He remembered the days of struggling with rent, skipping meals, and dreaming of better. Though successful now, Daniel had never forgotten his roots, or the loneliness that came with them. And when he saw Amelia counting her change at the counter earlier, something inside him stirred. He recognized that same quiet dignity he once carried when he had nothing. She didn't flaunt wealth or pretend to be someone she wasn't. She was real. At the end of the evening, Amelia hesitated when Daniel offered to walk her home. She didn't want him to see her small, run-down apartment building. "It's okay," she said quickly. "I can manage." But Daniel gently insisted, "Please. It's late. I'd feel better knowing you got home safe." As they walked, Amelia grew embarrassed, wishing she could disappear when they reached her street. "This is me," she murmured, pointing at the worn building. Daniel looked at it, then back at her, and simply said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to let me walk you here." No judgment, no pity, just kindness. When Amelia went inside, she leaned against the door, her heart pounding. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt hope for something more than survival. The days that followed were filled with messages from Daniel. He didn't vanish like others had. He checked in after her shifts, sent her little notes of encouragement, and sometimes surprised her by waiting outside the hospital with a warm drink. Amelia tried to protest, saying, "You don't have to," but Daniel would smile and reply, "I know I don't. I want to." Slowly, she let her guard down. She told him about her struggles, her student loans, her empty fridge some weeks, her fear of never being enough. Instead of pulling away, Daniel drew closer. Finally, one evening, he invited her back to the cafe after closing. Amelia walked in, surprised to see the lights still on and the smell of fresh pastries lingering in the air. Daniel was waiting with 2 cups of coffee at their usual corner table. "I wanted to tell you something," he began, looking almost nervous. "That first night we met, you paid with your last $5. I saw you counting your change. And I want you to know, I understand what it feels like to have nothing." Amelia froze, her cheeks burning. "You saw that?" He nodded gently. "Yes. And I admired you even more. Because even when you had almost nothing, you still chose to show up. You chose hope." She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "But why are you telling me this?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Because this cafe, it's mine. I built it after years of struggle. And when I saw you that night, it reminded me of myself. I didn't tell you sooner because I didn't want that to change how you saw me. But Amelia, I see you. I see your strength, your kindness, and your worth. And I don't care about what you have or don't have. I care about you." Amelia's hand trembled as she set her cup down. The weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes, it was almost too much to believe. For so long, she had felt invisible, forgotten by the world. But here was a man who saw her fully, not as a nurse struggling to survive, but as a woman worthy of love. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. "No one's ever said that to me before." Daniel reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "Then let me be the first of many." That night, Amelia walked home not with a heavy heart, but with hope blossoming inside her. She had spent her last $5 thinking it was the end of her small joys, but it turned out to be the beginning of something far greater. In the weeks and months that followed, Daniel continued to show her what it meant to be loved without conditions. He supported her dreams, encouraged her to pursue the specialties she had always wanted in nursing, and reminded her daily that she was never alone. Amelia still worked tirelessly at the hospital, still gave her all to patients in need, but now she did so with a lightness in her heart. Because waiting at the end of her shifts was someone who believed in her, someone who had once been a stranger but had become the love she never thought she deserved. And every time she walked past the cafe, she smiled at the memory of that one night, when a tired nurse with only $5 chose hope, and unknowingly walked straight into the arms of the man who would change her life forever. The next morning, Amelia awoke with a strange mixture of joy and disbelief. Her mind kept replaying Daniel's words from the night before, "I see you." For years she had been nothing more than a background character in other people's lives, a nurse behind the mask, a quiet tenant in a noisy building, a woman who disappeared into the shadows after her shift. Now, for the first time, someone had looked past all of that and chosen to see her. Still, doubt lingered like an unwelcome guest. She sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee, staring at the cracked linoleum floor. He's a CEO. He owns the cafe. Why would a man like him choose me? The thought made her stomach tighten. She was just a nurse drowning in bills, with barely enough money to survive. And Daniel, Daniel belonged to a world far beyond hers. Later that week, Clara, the friend who had convinced her to try dating, came over. Clara was Amelia's opposite in many ways: bubbly, outspoken, and always chasing new adventures. She plopped down on Amelia's couch with a grin. "So," Clara began, crossing her legs dramatically. "Tell me everything about this Daniel. Don't you dare leave out a single detail." Amelia hesitated. "He's different, kind, patient. We talk for hours, and it feels like time disappears." "But Clara," she bit her lip. "He owns the cafe. He's successful. And you're amazing," Clara cut in firmly. "Don't even finish that sentence. Don't compare yourself to his bank account. If he makes you feel valued, then he's worth your time." "Got it." Amelia smiled weakly, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. But deep down, the fear still gnawed at her. As weeks turned into months, Amelia and Daniel grew closer. They went on quiet walks through the park, shared late-night phone calls, and spent weekends sitting in his cafe long after the customers had left. Daniel introduced her to new books, new music, and even cooked dinner for her in his small but elegant apartment one evening. "Wait, you can cook?" Amelia laughed as he served her pasta. "I had to learn," he admitted, smiling shyly. "When I was broke, eating out wasn't an option. I made a lot of mistakes, burned rice, undercooked chicken, but eventually, I got better." Amelia tasted the food and raised her eyebrows in delight. "Better? This is incredible. You should open a restaurant next." Daniel chuckled. "One cafe is enough for now. But maybe, someday, with the right partner." He glanced at her meaningfully, and her cheeks grew warm. But not everyone celebrated their relationship. One evening at the hospital, Amelia overheard two colleagues whispering, "Did you hear? Amelia's dating some CEO. Seriously. Her. She can barely afford rent. Why would a rich man waste his time on her?" The words stung, though Amelia pretended not to notice. Still, their doubts echoed her own insecurities. Why would he choose me? The real test came one rainy evening. Amelia had just finished a grueling double shift when she received a call from Daniel. His voice was tense. "Amelia, I need to see you. Can you come to the cafe?" Worried, she hurried over, her shoes soaked from the downpour. Inside, she found Daniel sitting at their usual table, papers spread before him. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He looked up, his eyes filled with conflict. "The board of investors found out about us. Some of them think I'm distracted. They say being involved with someone who doesn't match my status could hurt the brand." Amelia's stomach dropped. "So, what are you saying?" Daniel stood, frustration written across his face. "I'm saying I don't care what they think. But they're threatening to pull funding for the new expansion if I don't end things." Her heart pounded painfully. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that their connection was strong enough. But doubt whispered in her ear, "Maybe this is the part where he realizes I'm not worth the trouble." "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've worked for." He stepped closer, taking her hands firmly. "Amelia, listen to me. I built this cafe from nothing. I've faced worse obstacles than a group of greedy investors. Do you really think I'd let them dictate who I can love? Tears welled in her eyes. But what if you lose everything? Then I'll start over, he said fiercely. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. But I won't lose you. At that moment, Amelia realized just how deeply he meant it. For Daniel, love wasn't a distraction, it was his anchor, his reason to fight harder. The weeks that followed were tough. Rumors spread in the business community. Some investors backed out. The cafe's expansion plans slowed. But Daniel stood firm, never once wavering in his devotion. And slowly, something miraculous happened. Word of his loyalty spread. Customers admired the way he defended Amelia, and the cafe gained even more popularity. People came not just for the coffee, but for the story of a CEO who chose love over profit. One evening, as the cafe buzzed with laughter and chatter, Daniel pulled Amelia aside. "Do you know why I wanted to build this place?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I wanted people to have a space where they felt like they belonged. A place where no one judged how much money you had in your wallet. And the night I met you, when you spent your last $5 just to be here, you reminded me why I started all this." Amelia felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Daniel." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple yet beautiful ring. "Amelia, you've given me more than I could ever give you. You've shown me resilience, kindness, and the courage to love when it's hardest. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught. The world seemed to blur around her. And then, with a smile trembling through her tears, she whispered, "Yes." The cafe erupted in applause as nearby customers realized what had just happened. Strangers cheered, the baristas cried, and Clara, who had been secretly watching from the corner, squealed with joy. Amelia had walked into the cafe months ago with nothing but her last $5 and a flicker of hope. Now, she walked out hand in hand with the man who had turned that small act of courage into a lifetime of love. For the first time in years, she didn't whisper to herself, "Just keep going." Instead, she whispered, "I've found where I belong."